and the world. Compiled in the Newstalk Radio Newsroom and powered by DemeraraWaves.com.
Good day with your major newscast. I'm Jessica Daw. First with the highlights. The courts of Guyana has successfully completed hearing some 3,000 gender-based violence cases of more than 3,000 cases brought for judicial review. The Guyana government has again found itself defending its track record to United States stakeholders. Police destroy more than $100 million worth of marijuana. In the region, the government of Barbados may impose restrictions on the imports of fossil fuel-powered vehicles as a new policy in 2022. The government of Barbados has submitted its response to a court case challenging the move by the government to transition Barbados to a republic by month end. And internationally, a deadly storm described by officials as a once-in-a-century weather event has severed roads and rail links around Vancouver, Canada. The details of these stories and more in just a moment.
Advertise with us on Newstalk Radio Guyana 103.1 FM for best coverage on programs on motivation, beauty and health, parenting and relationships, knowing your rights, and a variety of enlightening content, and get value for your money. Call our helpful staff today on 223-1056 or 223-1041 today.
Now for the news in detail. The courts of Guyana has successfully completed hearing some 3,000 gender-based violence cases of more than 3,000 cases brought for judicial review. Acting Chancellor of the Judiciary, Guyana, Justice Yonette Cummings Edwards, while delivering remarks at a University of Guyana-sponsored training for the legal profession, made the disclosure.
In Georgetown Magistrates Court, to date, we have 826 cases that have been filed. In the Diamond Magistrates Courts, we have 539 cases. In Berbice, Wim Magistrates Court, 149 cases. In the East Demerara Magisterial District, 612 cases. West Demerara Magisterial District, 452 cases. Fort Wellington, 180 cases. In Essequibo, 114 cases. In the Lethem, we have 17 cases. In New Amsterdam, 262 cases. In Linden, 149 cases. So a total to date of about 298 cases. I'm happy to say that we would have dealt with or completed about 3,000 out of those 3,298 matters.
The Madam Chancellor also calls for more user-friendly courts with skilled officers to help victims of abuse.
Witnesses who are grappling with the social ramifications, such as being ostracized by some family members simply because they've come forward, sometimes are challenged in making their report or making known to our staff what it is that they're seeking from the court. And so from a practical and professional standpoint, we have to raise the bar. We have to know what it is that is needed in the circumstances and to provide that service to the members of society.
Acting Chancellor Yonette Cummings also highlighted the need not to re-victimize victims while leaning on the courts to help them.
But despite the legislative and social measures, it has been our observation that the courtroom and the court environments can be a daunting place and even harrowing experience for persons who seek justice. And while judicial proceedings are essential in restoring a sense of safety and confidence in bringing some normality to a person's life, inadvertently, these persons are re-victimized when they come to seek justice. A member of society who seeks the protection of the court would need to have judicial officers and other functionaries who can understand their apprehension, who can understand their reluctance, their frustrations, even feelings of guilt and remorse as they make their complaints and they seek the various orders.
Acting Chancellor Yonette Cummings. The gender-based violence training course was designed by the University of Guyana for the judiciary in Guyana and is supported by UNICEF. The course will be covered over a 5-week period to equip judicial officers to skillfully handle domestic or gender violence cases that are before the courts. Amid persistent claims by the opposition of discrimination against Afro-Guyanese, the Guyana government yesterday again defended its track record in talks with a visiting American delegation. The mission is from the United States National Bar Association. The government's Department of Public Information says Prime Minister Mark Phillips and Minister of Governance Gil Teixeira met the delegation. The Prime Minister reportedly informed the delegation of his government's inclusive approach to development and commitment to the rule of law, including strengthening the country's democratic systems. He was quoted as saying that since the People's Progressive Party took office, it has been implementing its manifesto in an inclusive manner. The senior government officials said that his government's focus is also on strengthening the judicial system and a range of socio-economic initiatives, including a robust housing program, job creation, and infrastructural development, which will ultimately lead to a better quality of life for all Guyanese. Minister Teixeira added that the country has made several progressive strides with regard to laws relating to sections of the society, such as women, children, and the LGBTQ community. She pointed out specifically that in August, laws against cross-dressing were removed as an offense against the state. Heading the delegation is the president of the National Bar Association of the United States of America, Carlos Moore. The visiting officials are also scheduled to meet with several other members of the government, members of the judiciary, and the Guyana Bar Association this week. The National Bar Association is the U.S.'s oldest and largest national network of African American attorneys and judges. It was founded in 1925 and represents the interests of approximately 65,000 lawyers, judges, law professors, and law students. The visit comes against the background of repeated accusations by the mainly Afro-Guyanese-supported opposition, a Partnership for National Unity plus Alliance for Change, and that the predominantly Indo-Guyanese-supported People's Progressive Party is practicing racial discrimination. 2 Democratic congressmen earlier this year had called on the Air Finale-led government to be inclusive and to ensure adequate distribution of Guyana's wealth. The Guyana government has previously rejected those accusations. Police say they have destroyed $115 million worth of marijuana. The eradication exercise was carried out on Monday at Fort Nassau-Berbice River. No one has been arrested. Police say they destroyed 120,000 marijuana plants and 450 pounds of dried marijuana. The plants, ranging from 1 foot to 6 feet, were being grown on 4 farms. Plants. Police say another 450 pounds of marijuana were found in a drying area. They were all destroyed by fire. The National COVID Task Force, NCTF, has authorized the reopening of the Guyana-Brazil border crossing at Lethem in Region 9 from Mondays to Fridays. The NCTF, in a release on Monday, November 15, said the reopening of the border crossing daily from Monday to Friday takes immediate effect. Minister of Health Dr. Frank Anthony says the opening includes COVID measures to reduce the risk of transferring COVID-19.
This opening from Monday to Friday would allow for people to come across once they are able to produce their vaccination to show that they're fully vaccinated and that they have an antigen test or a PCR test that is negative. This is at all our border points. This is what we required. And at the border with Brazil, this is what we have put in place.
The crossing was closed more than a year ago following the COVID-19 outbreak here in March of 2020 and later restricted crossing to twice weekly. This had followed days of protests by Brazilians who had blocked trucks from leaving Bonfim in Brazil to come to Guyana to offload supplies. Guyana has recorded 56 imported cases of the virus. Those cases were not restricted to only cases coming from Brazil. Now for the news in the region. The government of Barbados may impose restrictions on the imports of fossil fuel-powered vehicles as a new policy if recommendations to be submitted next year by the Energy Division are accepted. Barbados Today News has reported that the Permanent Secretary PS in the Division of Energy, Andrew Gittins, revealed on Tuesday that later this year or early next year, his department will be proposing that the cabinet put the brakes on the importation of gasoline and diesel vehicles. The recommendation is to clear a path for clean energy automobiles as the country drives towards the goal of near 100% renewable energy usage by 2030. PS Andrew Gittins said the vision will ask Cabinet to consider the challenges currently being experienced by the local dealers of electric and hybrid vehicles whose clean energy cars' cost cannot compete with that of the conventional automobiles or the variety in models authorized for importation. Gittins argued that once the conventional vehicles are allowed to continue coming into Barbados, they would have to be permitted to run their useful lives. Gittins also pointed out that while the tax rates on electric vehicles were significantly lower than those of the conventional automobiles, the challenge comes from the initial cost. He said the Ministry of Finance has received representation from the dealers, which it will consider. The government of Barbados has submitted its response to a court case challenging the move by the government to transition Barbados to a republic by month end. Nation News Barbados reported that Attorney General Dale Marshall said Monday his office submitted the state's response to the injunction being sought by Grenville Phillips II. The AG also disclosed that with just 2 weeks to go before the transition, it is unlikely that there will be an actual court hearing and that the presiding judge will render a decision based on the submissions, which are expected to be wrapped up today when Phillips submits his rebuttal. The Attorney General says the case will not be done by a hearing because of the urgency of it. Instead, it will be done based on the parties' submissions. He says both parties in the matter are making submissions which the judge will pursue and hand down a ruling. AG Marshall poised that he prefers the judge rules before the transition takes place. He says unless an injunction is granted, the transition will go ahead as planned. A University of Miami expert on financial crimes in Latin America was sentenced Tuesday to 6 months in prison. WAND News says the expert was found guilty for a decision to hide $3 million in proceeds from a corruption scheme run by a businessman connected to Venezuela's socialist government. Bagley's transition from writing textbooks to carrying out what prosecutors called a textbook case of money laundering came from his dealings with another criminal defendant, a Colombian businessman, Alex Sahab. Sahab is fighting a charge tied to allegedly overvalued state contracts from Venezuela that he won by paying kickbacks to members of President Nicolas Maduro's family and inner circle. And lastly, for your regional news, China is making big purchases of soybeans from Brazil, an unusual move for this time of year. According to a Bloomberg analysis report, the Asian nation needs soybeans to feed its expanding hog herds. The report states that November is a prime time for the U.S. to sell its soya crops, having just finished the harvest. Supplies are at their peak, and American prices are usually most attractive in the world. Bloomberg says yet this year, Brazil is even cheaper and cutting into the U.S. key sales window. Last week, China bought at least 30 soybean cargoes from the U.S. and Brazil, with more than half coming from the South American nation, according to people familiar with the matter. The Bloomberg analysis says the move shows that Brazil, already the number one shipper, is becoming even more competitive on world markets. It says the shift in global trade could affect the U.S. stockpile and drive down prices globally. It means that lower soybean prices could relieve some of the inflationary pressure on food, since it is a key cost in raising animals for meat. Soybean futures in Chicago are already down about 25% from a high reached in May. While China's purchase of around 30 cargoes is substantial, it is not typical for the season, according to traders and analysts. Here now is your international news from the BBC.
BBC News with Sue Montgomery. Doctors in Sudan say 2 people have been shot dead by security forces as thousands join protests against last month's military takeover. Communications have been cut and bridges blocked to deter demonstrators. Will Ross reports.
The Sudanese security forces appear determined to stop the protests from gaining momentum. Tear gas has been fired at groups of people who had taken to the streets, waving Sudanese flags and denouncing the military. This was supposed to have been an important day in the country's transition. If last month's coup had not taken place, the army chief, Abdel Fattah al-Burhan, would have been handing over the leadership of the Sovereign Council to a civilian. Instead, he's still in charge and seems intent on preventing the people of Sudan from choosing who should lead the country.
The U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken, who's in Kenya on his first tour of Africa since taking office, has called for the transition to civilian rule in Sudan to resume. He also addressed fighting in neighbouring Ethiopia, as Anne Sawyer reports from Nairobi.
Secretary Blinken has urged the rebel forces in Ethiopia to halt any advance to the capital and called on all sides to come to a ceasefire and support humanitarian access. He said the U.S. backs ongoing diplomatic efforts led by the African Union. On Sudan, Mr. Blinken urged Somalia to complete the national elections process, which has been delayed for months.
Officials in the Indian capital Delhi, where air pollution remains dangerously high, have temporarily shut down several coal-fired power plants. It's the latest measure to try to clear toxic smog that's blanketed the city in recent weeks. All schools and colleges are closed until further notice. Non-essential construction is stopped and people are being urged to use public transport. India's Supreme Court has demanded urgent action. The Polish government says migrants camped on the Belarus side of the border have begun to pack up and leave after 10 days of confrontations. Poland says Belarus has for the first time sent buses to collect migrants from the border crossing. The EU accuses the country's president of facilitating the migration flow for political reasons. From Warsaw, Adam Easton.
Video footage from the Polish Border Guard agency appeared to show the migrants leaving the camp. A spokeswoman for the agency said it was not known where the people, many of whom are Iraqi citizens, were going. At the same time, Iraqi Airways has confirmed it will send a plane to Belarus on Thursday to take its citizens home. The EU has asked Middle Eastern countries to stop flights to Belarus, and several have agreed. Poland, with Brussels' backing, is determined not to let the migrants into the bloc, and has warned that the border and humanitarian crisis may go on for months.
World News from the BBC. There have been 2 separate explosions in the Afghan capital Kabul, killing at least 2 people. No group has said it was behind the blasts, but Islamic State militants have admitted carrying out several recent attacks. 10 people have been found dead in an overcrowded ship carrying migrants off Libya. The charity Doctors Without Borders believes they suffocated. Its rescue ship saved 99 survivors but discovered 10 bodies. A French right-wing television commentator who is expected to stand in next year's presidential election, Éric Zemmour, has gone on trial for alleged hate speech. He's not appeared in court over his comments on a TV channel. Hugh Schofield is in Paris.
Éric Zemmour was speaking after a knife attack in September 2020, in which a young Pakistani man had seriously injured 2 people outside the offices of the magazine Charlie Hebdo. He said, "These people are thieves, murderers and rapists. That's all they are, and they must be sent back." This earned him another prosecution for incitement to racial hatred. He's been convicted and fined 3 times in the past for similar outbursts attacking Islam and immigration. He stands by his comments and says he's the target of a legal system that's enthralled to the human rights agenda.
A Dutch party leader has apologised for leaving a draft proposal for a coalition government on a train in the latest twist to talks that have stretched for a record 8 months. Gert-Jan Segers from the Christian Union Party said he'd done something really stupid. The Indian capital Delhi is introducing a new system for alcohol sales today, paving the way for major reform. All government-run liquor stores, some 60% of the market, are officially out of business. Instead, privately owned shops can set their own prices. Gone too are the iron grills, through which much alcohol was bought. BBC News.
And that was your international news. Here now is a recap of the highlights. The courts of Guyana has successfully completed hearing some 3,000 gender-based violence cases of more than 3,000 cases brought for judicial review. The Guyana government has again found itself defending its track record to United States stakeholders. Police destroy more than $100 million worth of marijuana in the region. The government of Barbados may impose restrictions on the imports of fossil fuel-powered vehicles as a new policy in 2022. The government of Barbados has submitted its response to a court case challenging the move by the government to transition Barbados to a republic by month end. And internationally, a deadly storm described by officials as a once-in-a-century weather event has severed roads and rail links around Vancouver, Canada. And that was your major newscast. I'm Jessica Daw.
This has been the news, compiled in the News Talk Radio newsroom. For ongoing updates, visit demerarawaves.com, and you can check facebook.com/demwaves and twitter.com/demwaves.